Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Benny Vasquez. She is the chair of the AlmaLinux OS Foundation. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. So Linux, there's a lot of them. There's
Yes,
always
there
a
are.
person that's like compiling their own distro from source,
Yep.
And there's all the memes around like what your Linux distro says about you. And there's like chaotic good and neutral evil, and like you can figure out where you fit on the D&D grid based on the one that you chose.
Yep.
Why did you choose AlmaLinux?
Oh, interestingly enough, so I got invested and involved in AlmaLinux because I was a user of CentOS. And when Red Hat announced that they weren't going to be producing the downstream version anymore, we, as a community, needed a new version to replace it. And when AlmaLinux got spun up, the people that were involved were people that I already knew in the industry. And they came to me and said, hey, we need somebody who's good at translating tech to non-tech and just generally good at community in general. So, like, do you want to come help? And I said, yes, absolutely.
So Alma kind of emerged to fill a void, right? Because there's this landscape, not just of Linux users, but of enterprise Linux users.
Yes, for sure.
And then explain what CentOS did when they changed their focus.
Yeah. So let's go back even a little bit further, because for anybody that doesn't know, CentOS used to be a version of Red Hat that was just built by the community for free, because Red Hat is open source. So anybody that wanted to use Red Hat but didn't want to pay for it, they could use this thing called CentOS, but they were using it with their own support. They were using it with like community support, I guess is the way to put it. It was people supporting each other. There were almost 20 years of this operating system that was enterprise grade but free and didn't come with support. And if you understood Red Hat, then you could use CentOS and it was fine. It was used everywhere, from in every single industry that you could possibly consider. It has been used. I think when they announced the end of the traditional downstream CentOS fork, there were something like 40 million installs active getting updates that they knew about. So a lot. And when that organization was set up, there wasn't really a central ownership structure. There wasn't really any kind of centralized governance of it at all. And over 20 years, people get tired, and it was kind of hard to bring people in, and it was kind of hard to really know how to hand off the project. And they ended up working on a deal with Red Hat, where Red Hat hired all the engineers that worked on CentOS and took like ownership and responsibility for the project. That meant that, now Red Hat kind of gets to drive the project. And a couple of years into them having brought everybody on, they introduced this new thing called CentOS Stream. CentOS Stream sits in the build tree upstream from Red Hat. So it's just ahead of Red Hat. It's slightly more updated, slightly more, definitely updated more frequently, that kind of stuff. And then about a year later, they announced that they would no longer be producing the downstream version, which is, like I said, the version that everybody had been using forever. And as users, we needed it, so we started building it.
Did people freak out? And what was the reasoning behind that decision? Was it just a capitalism thing? Like they just we don't want to pay for this thing we're not getting any money for?
Well, I don't think they ever actually provided a reason that wasn't, this is better for our business or whatever. But if you look at it from their perspective, the goal with CentOS was to get for them from a business perspective is to get their users invested in testing and in providing feedback. But if CentOS is downstream from Red Hat, they're getting feedback too late. That's why they created the thing called CentOS Stream, so they get feedback just before Red Hat. They get it just before they're building the actual enterprise version, right? And that means that it was a lot easier for them to get their customers invested and a lot easier to get good quality feedback. And from that perspective, all they saw was that they were building a competitor to their product, right? Like, yeah, you can pay us for this version, or you can get this other version that's exactly the same for free. And it doesn't, from a business perspective, it makes no sense for them to build it, right? None at all. But there was definitely a lot of people that freaked out for a couple of reasons.
So if CentOS was a stable downstream rebuild, of Red Hat, which we would call RHEL. And then CentOS Stream is really CentOS upstream. Then where does AlmaLinux fit? Is it downstream?
We're downstream. Yep. Yeah, we take Red Hat's, well, not anymore. We kind of take Red Hat sources. We match Red Hat for what they are building and releasing and are Red Hat compatible.
Okay. And that compatibility is the most important thing, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
thing, because it's all about a promise of one-to-one binary compatibility with Red Hat.
Well, yeah. So we would not call ourselves one-to-one.
Oh, really?
Because in 2023, Red Hat announced that they would no longer be shipping the source code to git.centos.org like they always had. They'd always published the source code for Red Hat there. They changed where it was to a place behind a user login. And that user login, when you create an account there, you agree that any code that you access there, you will not use to build an operating system. And that meant that, that it effectively completely broke our pipeline. And in order to fix that, we started building from the same sources they do, from CentOS Stream. But we still are matching them for releases, release numbers, release versions, all of that kind of stuff. We're not rebuilding CentOS Stream because that wouldn't make any sense. We're still building Red Hat just from the same place that they do.
Wow, it's so weird because it's like I'm trying to imagine the family tree of this, except the family tree is shifting, and now you've become a sibling, rather than a downstream dependent.
Yeah, we literally had to make a diagram to make it kind of clear for everybody. It's kind of like before CentOS Stream and after 2023. Like this is where we are now.
Right. So you've got enterprises, you've got hosting providers, you've got enthusiasts, you've got regular Joes and Janes, and then you've got companies that depend on stability.
Yeah.
Who's out there listening to this show who may or may not be familiar with some of this drama, and they might say, oh, wow, AlmaLinux is exactly what I need because I'm in this situation and I can get out of that situation with Alma.
Yeah, so typically the people that end up choosing Alma are the ones that have a desire for, an RPM-based distro that is enterprise ready and has all of the features that they need. If they were ever going to use CentOS before, they're coming to us. They're coming to they're choosing based on, at this point, they're choosing based, if they're already sold on the Red Hat universe, they're choosing based on our governance. They're choosing based on like the flexibility that we have. Because one of the things that we can do now that we're really excited about, since the Red Hat source code shift, we actually get to build and ship things that are outside of what Red Hat does. So we've been able to add on top of it, add features or add back in hardware support, which is one of the big things that shifted. For example, in 9, there were a bunch of like RAID driver or RAID controllers and that kind of stuff that got dropped in support from Red Hat for reasons that we couldn't really find. So we added them back in because we could, because it's easy and it doesn't, since we don't have to match Red Hat exactly anymore, we have that kind of freedom. Everything that still works on Red Hat, everything that works on Red Hat will still work on Alma, but it's that kind of stuff. So people that need additional hardware support, people that need, one of the other big benefits we get is we can ship bug fixes for faster. So if there's a bug that's been fixed upstream but that fix hasn't been pulled into Red Hat for some reason, we can pull it in. And it's that kind of stuff that really starts to differentiate us.
So how does Red Hat feel about this? Do you bump into Red Hat people at the grocery store and they're cool with it and everyone's cool?
Yeah. One of the biggest things was what they said was you can't just rebuild Red Hat and not improve it. You can, if you want to do stuff, make it something different. And that was obviously something that CentOS never did, right? It was just Red Hat. And because it was, a collection of people, a handful of people, there was no motivation to add features or add anything else. But one of the things that we've been able to do is kind of improve on it. And so they say, yeah, no, that's fine. Do that. Serve the community that you need to serve that we're not serving. We're okay with that. We're buddies with all the people at Red Hat. It would be silly to not be, because if they don't exist, or if they don't exist, we don't exist.
So again, I might be asking dumb questions, but I'm not in this particular subculture. I think I'm just kind of like a poser when it comes to Linux because mostly I'm on Ubuntu. which is, it's kind of the default that one falls into. I'm trying to think about why one would pick Red Hat then.
Oh, there's lots of reasons.
Okay, that's good to understand.
The biggest reason is that you want to have Red Hat support. So that's the thing that ends up happening. There are definitely commercial support providers that you can sign up with that will give you support for AlmaLinux.
But like AlmaLinux has Cloud Linux and certified partners, and like there's folks that you could buy support for. Why would I want to get Red Hat when I could get Alma and then buy support from an AlmaLinux managed service?
I don't know. I think it's, like I said, I think it boils down to if you want to have the commercial relationship with Red Hat, because then you have somebody to call. There's a lot of people that are, also have like negative opinions about what they call the rebuilds or something like that, because they think, we're just taking Red Hat's work and benefiting from it. But I would argue that there's no real benefit in a nonprofit.
Well, which is great, because that brings me to the larger question, which is, this is a truly community-driven distribution, right? Contributions from anyone. You have a goal of a meritocracy when it comes to decision making. Like it sounds weird because it is the ideal, but it also feels like a throwback to like the way that it used to be in the 90s. Like, has it been challenging in the 2020s to be running a project as if it was the benevolent open source of the late 90s?
Oh, of course. Like, especially with the way that the shifting of both business feelings around open source and like public perception of open source has shifted. Like, there's two things, right? There's especially the business side. You've got people who say, well, if you say you're open source and the only familiarity that you have with open source is like single contributor open source projects, like I can't think of any of the big ones right now, but like companies that own an open source project and they control it and they decide what actually goes into it without accepting any external work or very little external work, then you're not going to really understand what an open source operating system would look like. And so like that is definitely a challenge in and of itself, is just proving and pointing out to people how it works. And the other side is what was the other part of the question you asked me?
No worries. It's trying to understand you've created a foundation and you're running it in an idealized way. Like,
yep, I got it.
It's 2025. Social media exists. Politics exists. Technology is political.
Yep.
But you're running it in a very chill way. And I think that's kind of cool.
The other thing that we have to pull into, or the other thing we have to fight with, is because people understand the value of open source now, it is absolutely critical to maintain that neutrality in our governance. Because if you, as a business, understand the benefit of open source and try to come into a project that you have, a vested interest in its continuation and really want to have the ability to push the project in the way that benefits you the most, that's not going to serve the community for AlmaLinux very well, right? So we have to make sure that whatever governance we set up is neutral and has the ability and the requirement to consider more than just a few opinions.
So as a nonprofit, you have to like file with the IRS and you take income and you pay, people to the best of your ability. But what if some company comes along and says, hey, I'll give you $1 million if you put this thing or that driver, if you do that work for us? Would that be a nonprofit foundation thing, or would that be a thing that they'd pay a commercial company for to like lobby or push into?
It's funny because that exact thing has been coming up for us recently.
Okay, cool.
So it's been a discussion because we have to decide where we want to land. Like the foundation right now, our annual budget is $250,000. We don't have.
Yeah, this is not millions.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I've looked up the filings.
Yeah, we do not have much money, right? And the benefit that we get right now from our sponsors, those range from like obviously some cash, but also we get some just like credits on like Azure or AWS or anything like that, or we get hardware or hosting, we get bandwidth, we get services, that kind of stuff. And a couple of our bigger sponsors actually employ people to work on the project, which is one of the things that I learned about when I was working at Microsoft with you. I figured out that we could, convince people to hire people full time to work solely on AlmaLinux, and it's been really, really great. And those are the sorts of situations where people start to feel like they have the ability to say yes or no to things, right? Well, I pay those employees, so I get to decide what they work on or what they don't work on. And we have to say, no, actually, the project decides what they work on, because that's what you're doing. You're paying them to work for the project. You're not paying them to work for you. And when that distinction has to be made, I think it gets really interesting. And you start to see let's say, integrity of the project, right? You get to start to see if the project really is willing to stand up and say, no, we're serving our community, whether or not you give us money. And we like your money because it helps keep us going. And we like that you pay developers because those do the work. But if you aren't on board with supporting the project and the way that the project needs to be supported, that's okay. We'll shift our relationship, right?
So if the amount of money that the foundation has is so relatively small, like it's not more than a couple of full-time people, then the amount of money that you can pay the people, you can't really pay a bunch of full-time folks.
Nobody is paid by the foundation. Zero people.
Okay. And that's on purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, at this point it is, because we don't have the money to pay them. Right.
Okay. But if like $2 million showed up tomorrow, would that mean you'd hire people, or would you support your infrastructure? Where would you do with an infusion like that?
We have a list of we wish we could do this with. If $2 million showed up and we thought it was going to stick around, we would definitely hire somebody. We'd hire maybe a couple of somebodies, depending on where we wanted to be able to put things. Because then we'd start to pull even further into that absolute guaranteed neutrality, right?
Right. Do you get into a chicken and the egg situation where a company, a big company's like, I want a forever free enterprise Linux distribution? Because the irony of having so little money, but also having the word enterprise in your core description of what you're trying to accomplish means that you get a chicken and the egg thing where it's like, well, I can't really trust you unless you're bigger, but I'm not going to give you money unless you're bigger. So go get bigger without my money.
Yeah, we've definitely had some of that, especially when we're talking about. Well, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to. I'm not trying to start beef.
Yeah, we're not trying to start beef.
Exactly, but
This is not a beef podcast, Benny.
maybe it should be. But no, we've definitely had, especially vendors who we want. We have users that say we need this support. Why aren't you supporting AlmaLinux? And then we go to the vendors and we say, hey, we have these users that need this support. Can we help you make sure this happens? And they say, well, we don't really see anybody asking for it. And then we send them the people that are asking for it, and they're like, well, we don't really see the benefit for us. And we're like, okay, if we're sending you billion-dollar companies that say we will buy more of your product if you support AlmaLinux, what are we missing? Because it's not this at this point. It's not about our size. It's not about your customer demand. What are you actually holding back on?
Right.
So it's been an interesting thing, because those people, there's obviously something else there that they're waiting to see. But there's definitely been the ones that are just I'm going to hold my money to know that you're actually going to stick around for a little while. I want to make sure that's a good investment. I'm like, you're already using us. It's a good investment. What are you doing?
So that I came to Microsoft to work on .NET and to work on open source, and I've been very fortunate to work and own the OSPO with Jeff Wilcox and his team, and work with really cool people that have gotten .NET and C# packages into the Red Hat Linux AppStream repository. So .NET is a first-class component. And it's 10 years later, and we're still trying to convince people that hey, RHEL 9 has .NET. Does that mean that Alma does too?
Yeah. Any of the core packages in the OS we ship by default. Anything that's shipped outside of that, we are if it's Apple or whatever, then you fully support AlmaLinux and Apple. All of that kind of stuff. Anything that you use or can use for Red Hat, you can use for us, unless for some reason the software provider is looking for a very specific operating system, which some of them do, which is
Yeah.
annoying. But
If they're poking
.NET for
around,
sure.
hopefully they're looking for function entry points and rather than
Exactly.
names of operating systems.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then I think it's called, and forgive me if I get this wrong, DNF, which is actually Dandified Yum, which is RPM, which is Red Hat package. It's so funny. Y'all, I'm going to say y'all, I mean y'all Linux people. Y'all love your three-letter acronyms, and then you love your recursive self-referential three-letter acronyms, whether it be GNU or RPM or like, we'll call it DNF. What's that mean? Dandified Yum. What is that? Well, it's like Yum, but it's better. It's dandified. All right. It's so much better. And how do you explain that to someone?
I don't.
But yeah, so I can go and just
Give them definitions and tell them to
DNF
move on.
install.net and it works. And then I didn't even know this. I installed Alma on WSL on Windows Subsystem for Linux.
Yeah,
So
for
now
sure.
I'm over here chilling on my Windows machine, running Alma happily, which is crazy. I love it.
Yeah, it's super easy to work with in WSL, and honestly, basically anywhere you want it. Like I cannot. It's been more than a year since I've even found like a web host that doesn't provide AlmaLinux. Like it's everywhere.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So then what does success look like? Is it just ongoing continued support and making sure that people can count on things? Because it seems to me like y'all have a long perspective. Like you want people to have reliable and stable operating systems for a decade, not 6 months of support.
Yeah, exactly. I want the big thing for me is both from the operating systems perspective, which is, 10 years of support and making sure that things continue to be stable and long-term the solution that people need, but also for the organization. So I don't want to set up an organization that relies on me. Like I am, a relatively stable person now that I'm over 40 and have all of the things that I need in my life. But I also know that I'm probably not going to want to do this for 20 years. So making it independent in a way that is going to outlast me, is going to outlast the people that are working on it now, is going to continue to have the long-term support from the community that it needs in order to survive for 20 years or more. That for me is the success. Setting it up so that it outlasts everybody that's here right now.
That is a really challenging thing. That's successor management, right? Like you're the boss of the board, but you also, as with anyone in software, you have a high bus factor, right? If you get hit by a bus, does the project continue? It will be sad. We will call back to this podcast and say, remember that time that Benny was on the podcast? But like, you don't want any one person to be the thing that makes the product successful or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why that governance thing that people don't think enough about is so important. And you've assembled a governance structure around this to avoid those things.
Yeah. It was really important for us that it's both completely independent and cannot be bought or sold. So setting up a nonprofit was the top of the priority list because in the US, nonprofits can't be bought or sold. So it was super important to us that distinction was made. And then all of the governance, the board is all community elected. It's all elected by members of the AlmaLinux Foundation. And the balance to the elected board is the self-managed and self-appointed ALESCO. It's our AlmaLinux Engineering Steering Committee. And to me, that balance of both elected and self-managed means that we're getting the best of both worlds and we can kind of steer the project in the way that it needs to be steered.
This might be a dumb question, but like, we don't know if Linux everyone says this is the year of Linux on the desktop, right? It's always going to happen. But AlmaLinux focuses on enterprise, but does that necessarily imply server versus client?
It honestly doesn't, because the thing I keep calling back to is you can use it anywhere you want, anywhere that you would use Alma or Red Hat, I mean. And we actually even have an atomic SIG that is focused on a desktop version of AlmaLinux, like desktop images, because they find it to be so stable and so good and so useful in their environments. That's what they want to do. Our whole I went to an event for the first time ever last year called SIGGRAPH.
Yeah.
SIGGRAPH is a VFX focused event,
Mhm.
and I had no idea the adoption that we had gotten in the VFX industry until I went there. And there's
Really?
people from Cinesite, there's people from ILM, there's people like all over the place that are like, yeah, we just switched our entire render farm to you and all of our desktops use you. I'm just like, this is insanity to me.
Because they value stability.
Yeah,
Like, it
stability
has to
and
just be stable and work.
exactly, exactly, and we're customizable and, like, all of the things that they need. It's just it's been awesome to see that, we are being adopted both for crazy, the render farms and the high performance computing and all of that kind of stuff, but
Mhm.
also desktops. Because you said the year of the Linux desktop, and that's been one of the long running jokes in the Linux world,
Oh,
right?
it's
Is
been
that
happening for 40 years or 30 years.
exactly, exactly, but we actually hit 5% like a month ago.
Seriously.
And yeah, and so, like, been a lot of really huge improvements in the user experience, across desktop environments in the last 5 or 6 years that have really helped us gain traction because, like, normal users can use it. And then the end of life for Windows 10, there's actually I don't know how much you want me to talk about this, but there's a whole, movement right now around getting people to migrate from Windows 10 to a Linux distribution of their choice
Hmm.
so that their hardware can continue to be used. Because one of the big things is that there's a bunch of really valid hardware that can continue to be used, but isn't gonna be supported in Windows 11, but is, very easy to keep alive and continue to be very useful if you switch to a Linux distro.
Yeah, I think that some of my best laptops have been like 20-year-old like ThinkPads. And if you
Exactly.
find a ThinkPad, it's like, how could I bring this back? And whether it be like Lubuntu or Puppy or like Linux, like or Alma, just these little Linuxes that are just fast as heck,
Mhm.
bring a 20-year-old laptop back to life. Like
Yeah.
you take one of those, you throw an SSD in it, double the RAM with whatever sticks you have around, and you're
Uh-huh.
out there with even 8 gigs zipping around.
Exactly,
And a
exactly, and
non-technical parent can use that very easily.
exactly, and even we're talking about hardware support. With Red Hat 10, they dropped support for V2 chips. Are you familiar with the whole versioning in x86 chips? So, there's standards and chipset definitions, and in this case, they dropped support for the second version of it and have only been supporting V3 as of Red Hat 10. But even as recently as, like, 2 years ago, there were people selling brand new laptops with chipsets that were not V3, they're only V2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that means that there are tons of pieces of hardware that people said, "Well, I thought this was gonna last me for a while," and they're getting really stuck.
Yep.
So, they came to us and said, "Hey, will you release a version of AlmaLinux that supports V2?" And we went through the engineering steering committee and said, "What do we think? How much work is this? Can we actually make this happen?" And we did because it was very valuable. And we had a bunch of people, especially at science labs, that said, we're gonna have a huge amount of overhead in hardware if we have to replace all of this just because Red Hat has decided we'll probably just leave the Red Hat universe and we'll go
Yep.
someplace else.
Yep.
And so we didn't wanna see that, like, we like the enterprise Linux ecosystem, so we helped with that, and then the next thing we had to do was build the extra packages for enterprise Linux repo. There's tons of packages that it's a Fedora project, and there's tons of packages that they maintain, and because they follow Red Hat, they weren't gonna be supported for V2 either. So we worked with the Apple folks and said, "Hey, do you mind if we build these so that they'll work with our V2 version?"
Mhm.
And they said, they had some feedback and said, "Let's do it in this way. Let's make sure it works this way. Let's make sure the bugs get reported in the right place," like that kind of stuff. So now we're building all of Apple for this V2 version, and we've gotten way more adoption than I honestly expected. There was a lot of people that, went to install an operating system and couldn't and said, "Well, what does this error mean?" And then figured it out and came to Alma and said, "Okay, this works now. I'm happy."
Now I remember this. It's far more obscure than you would think, right? It's like it's a timestamp counter, and it was a specific instruction set within early like pre-Pentiums to do a comparison. And I remembered that it was like, oh, well, if we just basically the Linux kernel folks like to tidy up. And someone's like, we can tidy up. There's like 15,000 lines here. We can just tidy up. And in the tidying up, which it's doing it's harmless. It's doing nothing. Yeah. It's not being run 99% of the time. But on an older machine, that's on a 32-bit x86, it's like, nope, sorry, you're left behind. And, Linux is known for not leaving folks behind. It's cool that you made that decision as a community and brought that back, because you're leaving a ton of people, people who are on Linux kernel 6.16 and back, you're bringing them forward. So was that a hard technical conversation? Like, was there an argument there, or was everyone like, yeah, let's do it?
It wasn't so much an argument as it was is this something, because what we wanted to do was commit to it for 10 years. And that means that like we had to be able to commit to it, right? Because if we're going to start it with AlmaLinux 10, we need to be able to commit to having support for this for the life of AlmaLinux 10.
Yeah.
And whether or not we do it for AlmaLinux 11 will depend on what things look like at that point, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to do it for another 10 years after that?
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, this has been very educational for me, because, you don't always hang out in other circles, and then you discover, you think you know a thing, and then you realize that there's a whole other world out there running on AlmaLinux. Folks can check it out at almalinux.org. You can download directly from there. You can contribute directly from there. And then my last question, I believe you have an event coming up soon, if folks are hearing this in July.
Yeah, we have semi-regular AlmaLinux Days, which are like full-day events that have a focus on a specific area of need or community or something like that. We've done 2 in Tokyo that were focused on like educating people around open source and around AlmaLinux in general. And then we had one in Germany that was focused on the web hosting company or web hosting world, because it was adjacent to an event called CloudFest. So it's like all like web hosting people. And on August 9th, we will be having our first one in Canada. It's in Vancouver in British Columbia. It's a full-day event that is adjacent to an event called SIGGRAPH. We already talked about it. It's that VFX event. And we will be focusing on VFX needs. And we've got a great lineup of people from all over the place that are going to come talk about some really cool things. And you get lunch.
And you get lunch.
There you go. Get lunch. Exactly.
So if you're in or around Vancouver, AlmaLinux Day Vancouver is coming up August 9th. You can check it out at almalinux.org/blog and see other events that are coming and going and get involved. And easy to install. One line to install on WSL and an additional line for me to run .NET. So now I'm testing my .NET applications on Ubuntu and on AlmaLinux and having no issues. I actually installed .NET 9 on Alma earlier today, and it worked just fine.
Fantastic. I love that.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Benny Vasquez, for hanging out with me today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.